This is going to be a quick review of Chapter 1. I'm not going to hit every single topic, but all of them are important, and the entire chapter could be on your test. But I'm going to highlight some of the ones that are exceptionally important, and then we'll go from there. We're going to start with Chapter 1 and go over some of the more important topics. The entire chapter is important, and any of the material could be on the exam. However, the ones that I'm going to be talking about will for sure be on the exam because I do believe that they are extra important. Starting us off, what is sociology in general? It is looking at society through the lens of an outsider. And the reason being that we want to analyze why we do certain things. One of the questions that I always had was, why are women forced to wear certain outfits and guys are forced to wear certain outfits? But then when you cross them over, it's okay for girls to wear like jeans and pantsuits and get short hair. It's considered more acceptable than a man going over here and wearing dresses and skirts, high heels, that sort of thing. Why does our society view Valentine's Day as a day to do all the romantic stuff that we're supposed to do? Right? You know, you grew up, people told you that. You went to school, you probably had Valentine's Day dances. You probably got those little Valentine cards and you had to put everyone's name on it. And there was no message, no nothing. Like, you know, when you're in elementary school and you'd give it and you drop it in their bag, maybe with a piece of candy, and you go through your bag and you wouldn't really care who gave you one, just that there was some candy attached. Why do we do that? I mean, Valentine's Day, where did that originate? Have you ever thought about looking that up, Googling it? What about Halloween? Why would we dress up as creatures that are supposed to, we make it kid-like now, but the general idea is you're supposed to be frightening people on Halloween. You know, trick or treat, just that saying says, you know, do you want me to play a trick on you, like, you know, on your house, or do you want to give me a treat? Your choice. Why is it customary for us as Americans to tip anywhere? Why don't we include that with a price already? I mean, if you're worried about how good this person is going to be treating you, then why don't we just open up tips for every profession, right? You could argue that bonuses are that. But let's say it's with a client-facing position, such as teaching. Why don't I have a tip jar? Or a PayPal account or a Venmo that everyone could tip me to make sure I give them clear instruction, right? If servers can get it, why shouldn't teachers? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not being like, that's not something I really want, but more money, yeah, that'd be nice. When we look at society, we need to be thinking first, are we going to analyze this from a micro perspective or a macro perspective? Because that can give us a clue on how to approach it. So if we wanted to find out how prevalent is domestic abuse in families where there is a spouse that is an alcoholic, okay? Do we want this to be a micro perspective where we're going to be basically kind of personal, looking in on an individual family or families instead of looking at society-wide issue regarding this potential problem? Macro is we're looking at how society has built this up as being potentially okay. It's okay for someone to drink in their own house. Is it more forgivable of spousal abuse if somebody was drunk? Is it more forgivable if there's abuse if both people were drunk when it happened? Let's take COVID, for example. When we look at the micro level, COVID would be looking at, let's say, a family. Let's say your family. You're having now to do school online. Let's say this is your first time. Never done it before, and it's tough. It's completely new experience. You're used to, showing up in class at a certain time, day, and so on. You're used to having a certain level of interaction with other students. How is COVID and this landscape around it, how is that affecting your family? How is that interfering with making money or progressing in your career or progressing in your education? Are you able to learn as much as you would as if you were in the classroom? So that would be like a micro perspective, how it affects like individual families and so on. On a macro point of view, we could look at the society at large and say, okay, why did they make this choice to do homeschooling? What structures, what support systems did they put into place? Moving on to the next thing is social structure. Now, social structure is basically the way their society, any society, is built. Ours is built a certain way. Germany is built a certain way. China is built a certain way, and so on. So some of the things that go along with that basically include what the population thinks is a norm, like what's normal behavior. That could mean something like, how are you supposed to act in the restroom, right? Culture of restrooms is a thing that I like to talk about, because the boys' restroom and the girls' restroom tend to have different cultures and what you're supposed to be doing when you're in there. Like, is it okay to talk? Is it okay to strike up a conversation with another person there? What I've tended to notice from my students over time is that the guys' restroom, and I can attest to this, that you treat it like a library. You go in, you do your thing, you get out with as little noise as possible. Any talking to another person while you're in there creates an uncomfortable atmosphere. Now, this might be different if you're at a place where there's a lot of drinking. People tend to let their inhibitions go down. Now, contrast that to the women's restroom. What I've usually heard from women is that the women's restroom is a fairly social place. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've heard from students and others is that women's restrooms become, I don't want to say a hotspot for conversation, but it's definitely sort of a community, a sense of community in there. I can't imagine doing that with the guys. Okay, basically the whole point with social structure is that these are things that teach us or guide us in a way to act, in a way to treat one another and approach one another. Long story short, social structure is how society sets itself up. That's basically it. There's a whole bunch of different ways that happens, and we'll go into that as we explore the chapters, but that is how it's built. So that's how you kind of remember it. It's structure, and that's how it's built. What morals, what values, what bathroom etiquette, whatever. What is holding the society up? All right, let's move on. I want to talk briefly about a sociologist that was at the forefront of sociology. She is actually considered the founder of sociology by many, but back in the day, she was not given that credit. Auguste Comte was given that credit. Comte basically, all he said was, hey, I think we should study how our society works, kind of like how we study biology or chemistry, scientific process and all that stuff. That was basically him. That was his contribution. Harriet, on the other hand, she was able to take sociology and the idea of studying it and turn it into a way to advocate for those that were being disenfranchised or ignored by society. So she became kind of like the active sociologist. Harriet is really considered the creator of sociology, honestly. Why do you think she was never given the title as the founder of sociology? If you're thinking it's because Comte was just such a lovable man, you're wrong. It was because Harriet was a woman. Moving on to someone who took sociology and went to an extreme with it, Karl Marx. The way Marx viewed the bourgeoisie, the haves, and the proletariat, the don't-haves, the workers, it's a bit too simplistic, especially in today's standards, because there's more of a spectrum there. But he used that to help explain a lot of society's problems back then. And his argument was the bourgeoisie keep as much profit as possible, keep the workers in the working class. Marx viewed that as basically a moralistic atrocity. So he viewed society as not being sustainable under that kind of system. The working class, the proletariat, would eventually wise up and overthrow the owners because they're tired of being treated way less than the effort they're putting in. And so they're just, because they have the numbers, they're just going to overthrow the entire bourgeoisie class. He is a prominent figure in sociology. And no matter what you think of him, he had an interesting way of viewing society at that time, of these groups competing for the same resources. And some just had a huge advantage. Marx's view on this was that there was no possible way to keep the working class in line, right? You don't want them rising up and overthrowing you. The only way Marx thought the system could continue by having the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and having no conflict and just being happy with where they were was to give everyone basically a false impression of reality. And that's what's termed the false consciousness. The false consciousness is, you can think of it as like propaganda. The general public will be misinformed to thinking that things are better for them than they really are. If you can control the media, the way people get information, you can control what the subject of conversation is going to be. And that's basically what this false consciousness is that people that have power can do more with what they want, more of what they want, and get away with stuff than the little guy. This term class consciousness refers to the moment that virtually everyone in that society learns of the reality that's going on, not the propaganda that's kind of being put out there. And once everyone has that, they're going to push for change because they make up the majority of voters. They can put whoever they want into office. They can, enact legislative retribution on companies that have done people wrong. So the only way to control that for the few that are super rich is those that are super rich have to buy TV advertisements, fund political campaigns. If you are part of this bourgeoisie class, the rich, you would need to make sure that, for one, a lot of people don't vote. You suppress the vote, right? You don't want that, because the more people vote, the more likely they are to not do what you want. So you go into huge campaigns of, trying to paint the little guy as somehow bad. Get the little guy, the proletariat, fighting with each other over really small things that have little consequence with each other. you get the proletariat fighting with each other instead of all getting on the same page and understanding the real situation and looking up to those that have done extremely well. I mean, right now in this pandemic, you would think everyone would be hurting, not making gigantic profits. And the wealthy tend to actually do really well in economic downturns. Like during our recession back in 2010, companies, they didn't care. They made some of the biggest profits those companies had ever made because they could get workers for cheap. Every time the economy tanks, they get workers for cheap. They usually can get the government to give them tax breaks. And why do they need to build more product if no one has money to buy their product? So they can pull back on operations, lay off a lot of people, look more attractive to investors, and grow in other ways. The end of chapter 1 brings up 3 theories that are going to be pretty vital to this class that describe, in their own way, society. And one is not necessarily right. Think of these 3 theories that we're going to talk about as different camera angles of a subject. So if, you know how movies or TV sets have a host, let's say, and you have, you know, your camera angle that's looking directly at them. And then you got the other camera that's looking at them from the side. And you got another one who maybe has a low angle view. I don't know, or, you know, high angle view if you want to be Instagram. Now, with these 3 theories, they're not necessarily competing with one another. It's just they can give a different point of view. And then you can decide on which one explains the situation better. Because that's what you're trying to find. You're trying to find something that is the best, that has the most explanatory power, so you can predict in the future similar situations. All right, the first one here you see is structural functionalism, or functionalism for short. With this one, I want you to think of it as a machine, like a car that's supposed to work. Has lots of little pieces working together to make this engine run and move things forward. So functionalism looks at those processes. It really doesn't care if things are equal, like equality and all that. It doesn't really care about that. Functionalism mainly just cares about, does it work? Yes, great. Does it not work? Okay, not great. Let's make it better. So if equality or inequality was somehow messing the system up, then functionalism would look at it and say, okay, this part over here is breaking. We need to change it in such a way that it will work again. So you could argue that functionalism would then step in to make changes because the system, the way it's going, is starting to fall apart. So depending on what you're looking at, what you're studying, functionalism is limited. So it's not used as often. It's not as explanatory as like our next one. The next one we're going to be working with is the conflict theory, and that is what Karl Marx was bringing up on how the rich and the poor were at odds with one another about who could get what, right? How they're, you know, getting defeated or somehow getting one over the other. It's not actual physical conflict. It's different groups trying to better their situation, right? And our third and final theory that I want us to make sure we focus on is symbolic interactionism. And basically this one is looking at all the different things that we give symbolic meaning to. I'll give you a good example. You know, let's say this, right? I'm at the baseball game. It's open again for some reason. Okay, it's open. It's not COVID. I'm like, hey, give me 2 hot dogs. Does that seem fine? Is that going to be a little awkward? Because here in America, this and this mean the same thing. You go to, let's say, England. You do this to somebody, That's like giving them the middle finger. It's like, oh, up yours, you know? It's not appropriate depending on what culture you're from. This, in essence, is just you're sticking two fingers up. It has no other significance other than two fingers are sticking up. I put them down, I got 4 fingers and a thumb sticking down. What does that mean? It means nothing. Why not? No one ever made it mean anything. What does this mean? Oh, this means 1. What does this mean? 1? No, this one does not mean 1. That means up yours. And the American culture, you know, it's really obvious, especially when you have a kid. I have a 5-year-old kid, and I've caught her on occasion not knowing, right? She wants to say 1. Look, 1. And I'm like, okay, I gotta stop this, you know, before she really gets into school, starts counting on her fingers. And I had to tell her, I said, yeah, don't stick that finger up all by itself, because people think you're trying to be mean to them. It's hard to explain, right? Because it's just a silly finger, 1 silly finger sticking up in the air, but it has all this meaning behind it. You're gonna go on a date, you get a flower, you get a red rose. It's Valentine's Day, right? It's coming up. Roses are going to be plentiful in shops and grocery stores and wherever else. Why roses? Why not dandelions or orchids? Why roses? Well, we have given it a meaning. Roses didn't come with an instruction book that said, hey, use me if you want to show that you love somebody. And the person receiving it got a rule book that says, if someone gives you a rose, they really like you or love you. Now, if you go on this Valentine's Day date and you give them a yellow rose, is that the same? No. Yellow rose means what? Friendship. So if you go on this date and you give her a yellow rose, she knows to take it as, oh, I guess he's not that interested in me. You know, maybe they ran out of red roses and that was the only one they had left. But he would have to explain that to the other person, or she to the other person. And it is the small things like that that mean virtually nothing except for what we give them. And this is what really plays into our society. Like when I mentioned before about why do women wear high heels and men don't? Why do women have nail salons and get their nails done, you know, long gel nails and everything like that? I'm not an expert, so I'm sorry. So having that be only for one gender and not for the other is all about symbolism, about feminine, about being feminine versus masculine. And that, you know, for guys too, right? You know, being a bodybuilder. While women can do it, it is usually seen as more appropriate by society if a guy is that way. Doesn't mean that it has to be, but society in general will be more accepting of a guy that's a little buff than a girl that's a little buff. It's just the way it has been, because we have given symbolism to that. Now, things are changing, right? Marijuana used to be considered like this drug that would make you go crazy and, you know, destroy your life. But now it's legal. Now you can buy it, you know, from the store. And now we're fine with it. You know, you would go to jail, you know, even a decade ago. You'd go to jail if you had some marijuana at your house and you're smoking up. So it's really, culture changes a lot. And that's one of the problems about sociology, is that you have to constantly reevaluate where things stand. Unlike the other sciences where I know in chemistry, 2 hydrogen atoms combined with 1 oxygen atom equals water. 10 years from now, that's still going to equal water, and 100 years from now, still going to equal water. But when I say marijuana is bad for you, 10 years go by, and now it's no longer that. It's more accepted. People are kind of fine with it. So you always have to, as a sociologist, that's your job. You have to reevaluate everything and make sure that the people that are making the decisions have the best knowledge at their disposal to address society's problems. Or you're supposed to be pulling up and displaying society's issues. Goffman came up with the idea that basically everyone is trying to have a really good impression or give a good impression to other people, right? So if you want people to think that you are in a social class that's higher than maybe what your real social class is, you're gonna probably wear clothing that has certain name brands on it. Jewelry that is at least it looks like it's expensive, and not something from the dollar store. Not that dollar store stuff can look good, I'm just saying society doesn't tend to value things that are cheap. If you go driving down the road, or even through the local mall, around the local mall, are people going to be, are they going to look at the Honda Civic from 2001 and be like, ooh? Or are they going to look at the Lamborghini that is this year's model and it's driving by as well? So, and society does this. We place a huge importance on wealth and money. Think of life as like a play, and we are all actors on a stage, and we have our line to say. What is your line going to be? Whatever. No, I'm just kidding. But if life is a play and you are an actor, and you want people to see this character in a certain way, you're going to do things that are going to give them a good impression, right? And that's what we term like impression management. You're going to make sure that first impression is a good one because they say that's the most important. I'll give you a good example of impression management. Let's say you're studying for a test, you worked really hard on it, you take it and you bomb it. You don't know why, but you bomb it. You walk out of the class, maybe people saw your grade. Do you tell them, man, I worked so hard on studying, I failed it? Or would someone be more likely to walk out of that test and say, yeah, if they're worried about their impression on other people, yeah, I barely studied for that test. I'm surprised I got as good grades as I did, to make it look like they didn't fail it because of perhaps their intellect. But we do things or say things, even if it's false, in order to preserve the image that we want others to see of us, if like we're this actor on a stage. Thank you for being part of Chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed this. Be on the lookout for Chapter 2. It's going to be coming up. I'll see you later.